Alright guys, so in the last video we set up Redux with our store, and we also created our auth reducer, okay, which isn't really doing anything right now. But what I want to do now is talk about actions, okay, which is obviously a very important part of Redux because everything we do is going to be an action. So for instance, when we click that submit and we register a user, that'll be a Redux action. Right now we're just making our Axios request directly in on submit inside the component, and we don't want to do that. We want to call an action to do that. So let's create a folder in the source called actions, okay, and we're going to create a file called auth actions.js. Okay, and inside here is where we'll have our register action. Now we're not going to get to the full registration in this video. It'll be too long because I just want to kind of do some testing just to show you how this all works, okay, and then probably in the next video we'll get to do the actual requests where we register the user. We also have to add an errors reducer because that's how our errors are going to come back to our component. Now this is going to be kind of tough to explain because of what we're doing. We're not actually like creating a to-do or a post or something like that. We're registering a user where we don't actually need to dispatch anything to our reducer. All I want to do is call the request and then redirect the application, okay, or redirect to the login page on success. If there's an error, then we want to actually dispatch a get errors action to the reducer, but it's not going to go to the auth reducer, it's going to go to a separate errors reducer. So it's a little confusing, so just kind of bear with me a little bit. What I'm going to do is create just a test dispatch type. Okay, so we're going to create inside actions in the folder, we're going to create a file called types.js. all right, and then types, all a type is basically a constant. So we're going to say export const, and let's say test underscore dispatch, and set that equal to a string of the same thing, test underscore dispatch. Okay, and that's all this file is going to be, is a collection of these. So for instance, we'll have get errors, clear errors, get profile, set current user, which that's what we'll fire off when we actually log the user in. But for now, we're just going to use this test dispatch type. So in auth actions, let's create a function. Okay, this will be an actual function, but it's not going to do what we're having it do right now. I just want to show you how all this works. So let's say export const register user. Okay, so we're going to use arrow functions here. So basically this will be any parameters it takes, like let's say user data, not date, data, and then we'll use an arrow function. All right, now if we want to dispatch something to our reducer, we can simply return an object which must have a type. Okay, it can have anything else, but it has to at least have a type, and the type we want right now is this test dispatch. So we actually have to import this into this file. So we'll say import test dispatch from /types. All right, so we'll say type test dispatch. Now you can just return the type, but a lot of times you'll have some data as well. So what I'm going to do is say data, not data, I'm going to call it payload. You'll see this a lot, payload, and let's just send along the user data. Okay, so the user data that gets passed into this action, this is actually an action creator. We'll go ahead and dispatch this to the reducer along with that user data. So let's save this, and then let's go to our auth reducer. We also have to bring in the type. So let's say import test dispatch from, we want to go .. into actions and then into types. All right, now we can add this as a case. Let's say case test dispatch, And then what we want to do here is return. Now remember I said we don't really change the state or mutate the state, we make a copy of it. So we want to take the initial state, which is this right here. Okay, it's set to this variable, which is this here. So if we want to basically take what's already in the state and just kind of add to it, we would use the spread operator. All right, so we say ... state, and then we can also send along the, remember we had the payload, which includes the user data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this user object right here, and I'm going to set this to action.payload. And that's going to fill this user with that payload, which is this user data. Okay? Now remember, we haven't done anything to do with the server or registering. All we're simply doing is dispatching to the reducer the data that's passed in. Later on we're going to do our Axios request here and then dispatch what we need to, or do whatever we need to after the user's registered, or if there's an error or whatever. But I just want to show you how this actually works. So let's go ahead and save this file. Okay, make sure the actions is saved as well. All right, now let's go back to our register component, and we want to be able to call that register user action. Now whenever you're going to use Redux in a component like this one, you want to import something called connect. Okay, so we want to import connect, and that's actually from the React Redux library. And this is used for just that, for connecting Redux to this component. Now, if you ever hear the term container, a container is basically just a React component that works with Redux. And sometimes you'll see a folder called containers and they'll split them up. I don't do that. I just keep all my components in the components folder. Okay. Now, we also want to import the action we want to use, which is register user. And we want to bring that in from //actions/ auth actions, okay, because that's where it is. Now we need to go down to the bottom here, and instead of exporting just our component, we now need to export connect, put a set of parentheses, and then another set of parentheses which includes the component. So you want to do that, okay. And then here I'm just going to put null for this first parameter, and I'll show you what this is in a second. The second parameter is going to be an object where we can map our actions. So we want to put in here register user. So now if we want to call register user, we're going to go up to on submit. Let's just comment out this Axios request, and we can say this.props, because now any action that we bring in we call through the props. It's going to be stored in there. So register user, and we'll pass in new user. All right, so let's see what happens if this actually gets called. So if we were to, whoops, yeah, that's right. So if we were to now try and register a user, and don't worry about that message there. So we'll say test at test.com. and submit, and nothing's going to happen. But if we look in our Redux extension here and we look in auth, you can see that user is now being filled. All right, and if let me just do that again, because I want to show you, see how this diff states are equal. So we have our initial state, which is the user being empty, but if I add the user, and now I submit, you'll see now under diff, it has the difference in the state, which is the new user being added. Okay, and if I look at state, there's our user. It's not actually, he's not being registered because we're not doing anything to do with Axios yet. I just wanted to show you how this flow, this workflow works. And you can see it called test dispatch because that's what we called. Okay, and then in the reducer, it it's reducing and sent back the initial state along with the new user, because that's what we added as the payload. Now, you're not always going to want to dispatch something to the reducer. In fact, when we make our actual Axios call on success, I don't want to dispatch anything, because all I want to do is, once the user's registered on the back end, I just want to redirect to the login page. But if there's an error, so in the catch of the Axios request, that's when I want to actually dispatch something called get errors. Okay, but that's not going to be part of our auth reducer. It's going to be part of our errors reducer. So we're going to create a separate one for that. We could put the errors in our auth reducer, but I don't want to have an errors object in every single reducer. I want a dedicated reducer for errors. So that's why we're going to do that. All right. But it doesn't matter what action file you're in. If you call get errors and any reducer has get errors as a type, as a case, that's going to fire off. All right. Now, one last thing I want to show you is, if we wanted to actually get any of the auth state into our component, then we have to create a function called map state to props. And I'm going to use an arrow function here. It takes in state as a parameter, and then we're going to put a set of curly braces in here, and we're going to say auth and set that to state.auth. So what it's doing is it's putting the auth state inside of a property called auth, so we can access it with this.props.auth, and then anything in the state like user or is authenticated or anything that's in that state. Okay. Now this state.auth, this right here is important. It's important to understand that this comes from your root reducer, whatever you have here. If we called this user, then you would need to make sure that you put user right here. It would be state.user. And this you can set to whatever you want. This is just the property within your component. All right, now once you create map state to props, you need to just pop it in here for it to work. Okay, so now what we'll do is, to test this out, let's go to our render, and let's say const, and what I'm going to do is use destructuring to pull out the user from this.props.auth, okay, which is the same as saying const user without the curly braces equals this.props.auth.user. All right, and then down here, just to output it somewhere, I'm not gonna keep this here. Let's say we'll say if user, we'll use a ternary operator. Then let's output user.name, because remember it's an object and it has a name. Else null. All right, and then we'll go to our application. Let's make sure we have no errors. Don't worry about that error. And if we fill this out, so we'll say Brad now, as soon as I submit, it's going to call register user in the actions. It's going to dispatch to our reducer, and then it's going to fill that user object. And then remember, we mapped that we mapped the auth state to a property in this component, and then we're going to test for the user. If there is a user, it should output the name. So let's submit, and there it is. Okay, so that came from our state. If we look in Redux and we look in our user, you can see that we got the name, which is Brad. Now, one last thing we want to do is include our prop types, okay? And in React, this is a React thing. Any properties you have in your component, you should map to prop types, okay? And you can set them to data type, also if they're required or not. So what we're going to do is bring in up here. Let's just go right here and say import prop types from React. I'm sorry, not React. Prop-types. And this should actually be a capital P. All right, so we'll bring in prop types, and let's go down right above where we did map state to props, and we're going to take the name of the component, which is register, and we're going to call dot prop types, camel case. We're going to set it equal to an object, and then any properties. Now remember, register user, it's an action, but it's also a property, so we want to add that, register user, and we're going to set it to prop types, capital P, dot func, because that's what it is, it's a function, and it is required. Okay, and then remember, auth is also a property of this component, so we want to set auth to prop types dot, and then this is an object, so we want to do dot object, and we want to do is required. All right, and that should be it. So we'll save that, and it's kind of a pain, but it's just good practice in React in general. So we will be mapping all of our prop types. All right, and everything should still work. We'll just have that Axios error here. It's just because we brought in Axios and we commented out the block that actually used it. All right, so in the next video, we're going to start to actually make this register user action work by moving our Axios request into the action, and then also handling the success, which we just basically want to redirect, and then also handling the errors. So we'll create our errors reducer. All right, I will see you in the next video.